Hi, welcome to episode number 34 of Cilium Weekly, a weekly video where I cover a Cilium feature. And in previous episodes, I usually cover new features. This time I'm going to go back to a feature that has been around for maybe 18 months, 2 years, but maybe a feature people don't know about. A feature called Bandwidth Manager, which lets you control how much traffic a pod can generate, right? It's essentially some kind of traffic shaping or traffic policing where you prevent a pod from consuming too much bandwidth and using the Cilium Bandwidth Manager. Now, I wrote a detailed blog post about 12, 13 months ago about this feature, how it works with Cilium, how it's enforced, and how we can prevent this kind of bandwidth starvation or bandwidth exhaustion where a pod could take over all the bandwidth available. So feel free to take a look. I go into more details about this feature. But again, as far as I know, Cilium is the only kind of CNR which is able to do this, especially in the way that Cilium enforce it. And it's really simple. And looking back to my days as somebody who was working towards the CCIE, and it's chapter 14 of this book. We had the full quality of service curriculum and blueprint. And that was my least favorite part of the exam. It was really complicated how to enforce traffic policing on a router's interface, right? How to prevent a router from sending too much traffic and how you had to kind of queue the traffic. So it was a nightmare on Cisco devices. And using Cilium, you just need to essentially write up an annotation on your pod to specify how much traffic you want to let this pod generate. And Cilium will enforce it for you once you enable the Bandwidth Manager feature. If you're interested more generally in TCP congestion control and quality of service, I recommend this book, which is a TCP congestion control book. And I happen to be one of the kind of reviewer, really minor contribution to the book, but I would recommend if you want to go deeper into all the different congestion algorithms. Okay, enough for now. Let's go and look at the demo. So what I've got, let me just make myself smaller, and we're going to be looking at AKS cluster. I deploy AKS cluster without a CNI, right? It's bring your own CNI. And then I install Cilium 1.14.2 in my resource group, and I enable the Bandwidth Manager feature, which is not enabled by default. And what I've done is, again, to show you how the Bandwidth Manager feature works, we've deployed a NetPerf client and server, net performance pair of devices, and we run a network performance test between the two. And we'll have a look before I enable the Bandwidth Manager for this particular pod, and then we'll see what happens, and then we'll see what happens when I enable that feature. Now, the way to enable it is by adding an annotation to my pod. Annotation is the following: kubernetes.io/egress-bandwidth, and you can specify the actual limit you want to enforce. And we're going to limit that to 10 megabits, 10 megabits per second. But first, let's do it without it. So I've deployed the pod, but as you can see, this annotation is commented out. So when we run a network performance test, we're going to do it using NetPerf. As you can see, I'm using the NetPerf MERTS, which is actually stream in reverse. So what we're doing is instead of doing network performance from the client to the server, we're doing one from the server to the client, which is kind of a more logical way of doing this, because this is typically the larger traffic will be coming from the server to the client. So I'm running this network performance test, and you can see the performance. Let's have a quick look. Just takes a minute or so, and you see the throughput is 1.3 gig per second, right? So again, it's within my AKS cluster. There's no limits. I've got 2 pods, NetPerf, and my client and my server are located in 2 different nodes. And again, performance is excellent. Now we're going to remove that annotation, well, that comment, and we're going to add an annotation to my pod. And let's apply this. There we go. All right, so I've just changed my server. I've applied this annotation to my server, and just by adding this annotation to my server, I can control and shape how much traffic can exit the server. So if we run the network performance test again, this time we should be about limited to kind of between 9 and 10 megabits per second. So let's have a quick look and see. Here we go, 9.54. Right, so that's really it. Again, comparing to the good old days of the CCIE, I'm telling you, this is much easier to enforce traffic rate limiting by simply enabling this feature, bandwidth manager, and also by adding an annotation to your pod, and Cilium will enforce that rate limiting for you. And that's it for the demo. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one.